www.offthecorner.net. I'm Rallo, and you are watching the F.A.C.T Project. F.A.C.T is an acronym that stands for Fundamental African-Centered Thought. The goal here on the F.A.C.T Project is to convey some facts and some information to members of our community. We have joining us again today for the second time the great educator, author, activist, scholar, and long-distance revolutionary, great Dr. Uhuru Hotep. Peace, Baba Hotep. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you, my brother. Asante Sana. I'm glad to be here. It's always a pleasure to be in your company.
I appreciate that. Now, last time we spoke, on a personal note, you were moving. How did that go?
I am still in the process. I have 95+% complete.
Okay.
So I'm up and running and getting things done. And I'm enjoying my new space immensely.
Okay. And now, apart from those personal things, what are you working on right now, academically or just, scholarly or otherwise, activism, whatever?
Mm-hmm. Well, my major project, which brought me to Georgia, was the acquisition of land. I've retired, semi-retired, and was able to pull some money out of the system. And I'm a admirer and follower of the great Booker T. Washington, who at the turn of the last, of course, he's the founder of Tuskegee University now in Alabama, Tuskegee, Alabama. And during his tenure among us, his message was to the African American people was to buy land and become self-sufficient, develop an economic base, ownership base, then move into politics. Okay, and you know the story. We, at least the black intellectual class, chose to follow W.E.B. Du Bois's plan, which was to become members of the Talented Tenth, seek college education, and seek the vote. Don't worry about buying land, get political power. And he felt that would come through participating in the electoral process, not only as voters, but also as candidates. And that's where we are today. We're still pursuing the political end, and we are neglecting the economic development. And certainly, all economic development begins with land, owning land. And we, as far as the professional class, chose not to follow that recommendation. We don't want to get our hands dirty. We associate land with the South, hard work, slavery, drudgery. It's not sexy to be a farmer,
right?
To grow your own food. But that's the mission I'm on.
Okay, so now have we done things in reverse, meaning Black Americans?
I would think so.
Okay, and so the civil rights mentality that a lot of us are stuck in, you say that's not going to serve us in the long run. Is that correct?
No.
Okay.
I don't think it's going to be. It's not going to allow us to acquire what I call sovereignty, restoring our sovereignty. When our ancestors were brought here, they came from sovereign, independent, self-sustaining communities, nations. And of course, slavery and being enslaved is the removal of one's sovereignty. It's the loss of one's sovereignty. And we haven't got it back yet. Once again, to be sovereign means to be self-sufficient in at least 5 or 6 specific areas, which we'll be talking about today because it's at the heart of fundamental African-centered thought. And that is where sovereign people, free people, independent people control their food, their access, their distribution, their production of their food, their clothing, their shelter, their education, their medical needs, and of course, the big one, self-defense. That's the attributes of a sovereign community.
Mm.
And by that definition, Black Americans are not sovereign, have never really been sovereign. 100 years ago, we were closer to it then when we lived in the South on the land, owned land, farmed land. The land sustained us and our families, but we have lost sight of that as a fundamental test of being a free and independent people, a sovereign people, a self-sustaining people.
Okay, so you're saying you don't think that we can vote our way to freedom because some people believe that
Oh no, no way. You got to own something.
you got to own something, right?
You got to, yeah. Political power rests upon economic power.
That's correct. That's
Yeah.
correct. Now you mentioned the word sovereignty. I think the road to sovereignty is black self-sufficiency. If
Yes,
uh,
sir.
if you have sovereignty, that means you own the land, you govern yourself, and so forth and so on. And I think if you don't already have a self-sufficient status, being sovereign may not necessarily work out well for you. What are your thoughts?
Well, you have to have a sovereign mindset. You. I believe the Black community needs to, through our churches and other organizations, have a discussion on our two choices. We can continue to pursue the political route via the Democratic Party and whatever support we can get within the Republican Party, and voting and running candidates and participating in the existing political structure, which again is two party, the Democrats or the Republicans. It's quite clear that the Republicans don't need us, don't want us to be a part of their camp, so we really have no choice but to be members of the Democratic Party if we want to continue to follow that path. And it's a path that will lead to the further, or the maintenance, may be a better way to put it, the maintenance of the Black professional class. They can, I mean, those Blacks who actually run for political office and who win political office, they're going to benefit from that system. But the rank and file Black people know it's an elitist strategy. It is a elitist path. It's for the Black elite, or those who want to be members of the Black elite. Grassroots is to own the doggone land. Wherever we live, be it in cities, the country, wherever, we should be about the acquisition of that land, owning those buildings, and approaching our status within this country, principally from an economic standpoint and from a global standpoint. We're members of the broader, larger African world community. We're not just Black Americans. We're global citizens, global African citizens. But most of us have refused to acknowledge or to appreciate an understanding that we're bigger than just the United States. We're bigger than just New York City. We're bigger than just California or Los Angeles. We're global people. And we got to have global investments and global vision and global education if we're going to move into this 21st century, what the Europeans call the 21st century, and restore our lost sovereignty. Slavery took it away, and our challenge is to put that sovereignty back in place, just as our ancestors were prior to being brought to this country and made into slaves. We didn't arrive here as slaves, we were made into slaves through a process called seasoning, is what the Europeans called it.
Mm.
So we were seasoned into being slaves and having a dependent mindset. And we got to reverse that seasoning process to restore our sovereignty and an independent mindset. And this is where your book is so critical, because it helps us appreciate the fact that there are certain fundamentals that have to be in place before a people can restore their sovereignty and power. I want to ask you, as the author of this wonderful book, I'm going to hold it up. I don't know if people can see it. I want people to see it. I want people to buy it. I want people to read it in our community. Okay, that's what the book looks like. And it is a 300-page plus discussion. Easy to follow, very basic and fundamental. It's not something written for the ivory tower,
That's
black
right.
intellectual. No, this is for the grassroots to use. Um, there are 10 lessons, 10 chapters, if you will, that make up the book. And it's a, well, this is where I would like to begin. Is with you defining what you mean by African centered. I think that concept there is at the core. And if one doesn't have an appreciation for what constitutes being African centered, well, then they may not be able to assimilate what's in this book. So, can
Okay,
you
that's good.
define that for us?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, first of all, information is vital for us to thrive as a people. And as it relates to information, we've only gotten a European centered orientation as it relates to our education. Many of us have been socialized by white owned media, television, and so forth. And so we don't necessarily have an African centered mentality. African centered meaning African culture is at the center of everything we do. African centered thought should be at the center of everything we do. We should learn as much as we can about African history, culture, traditions, and so forth, and apply some of those things in our everyday way of life. And
Okay.
so, yeah, and so African centered means returning back to our ancestral philosophy, our ancestral traditions, and African centered ways of being. So, for example, it was the European that said, I think, therefore I am. It was the African that said, I am because we are. And we have to look past, I think, the individualism and go more towards collectivism. You talked about the Black elite. The Black elite are very into individualism. Individual comes from the word divide. And so if you divide yourself from the group, that could be a detriment to you. And a lot of the Black elite make an attempt to divide themselves from the group. So, for example, Baba Hotep, you know that lions travel in prides, right? They travel in herds.
Yes, sir.
If a little baby lion cub strays from the herd because he has a short attention span, if he gets too far away from the pride, the hyenas will jump on him and they're going to tear him up.
Mm-hmm.
And so individuality and individualism is actually a prerequisite to vulnerability. And as African people, and I said this in the book, as African people, we've always thrived and done better when we function as a collective. And so when I talk about African centered, these are some of the ideas that I'm talking about. To the European, the highest ideal is the thing or the acquisition of the thing. And the thing could be money. It could be, colonialism and taking land. It could be, their search for gold, which when they came to the Western world, they were on this frantic search to find gold. The highest ideal in their culture is the thing and the acquisition of the thing. Traditionally, for us as African people, the highest ideal has always been relationships, one to another. And so when I say African centered, those are some of the things that we need to get back to because we've forgotten who we are as a result of colonialism, enslavement, socialization, media, not just media, but religious institutions that are not giving us the proper knowledge of ourselves. So we've gone away from our dignity as a people, as Africans, and we've gone more towards imitating our oppressor.
Mm-hmm.
So we must return back to Black dignity. And I think in an effort to do that, we need to return back to positive Black messaging, where we refer to each other as brother or sister.
Mm-hmm.
You can remember a time in the 70s, Black Power movement, late 60s. If you saw a brother or sister you didn't know, you referred to them as brother or sister. You would address them even if you didn't know them. And I think that's more getting back to us being African centered. We've gotten too far away from that. And I think the system, it does a very good job at keeping us ignorant. And I think we must be ignorant in order for white supremacy to work.
That's right.
And so I think if we get back to understanding our culture, our history, our philosophy as African people, it can take us away from that ignorance and begin to move us more towards being productive and creating an independent reality for ourselves. So that's how I would answer that question.
Well, that's a good answer, and I would like to have you elaborate upon that. What I'm hearing is that our people have been socialized, educated by in European centered institutions from womb to tomb, so that all of our values, beliefs, lifestyles, and worldview reflect European values, European beliefs, European orientations, European styles. And African centered means not necessarily rejecting that European orientation, but being aware that we have it and that it can color our thinking if we're not careful in negative ways. Embracing African culture and history and having that as our center, our traditional knowledge, our African based knowledge, our African values, our African beliefs, our African lifestyles, and worldview that our ancestors have, incorporating the best of that would allow us to be African centered. Those concepts, those practices, those beliefs uh, is at the basis of being African centered, embracing that and looking at the world through those set of lenses along with our European lenses. Uh, and I think it's not necessarily an all or none phenomenon. We're not going to quit being Eurocentric. No, that's too deeply ingrained in us. Uh, Even those of us who like to believe we are in the process of re-Africanization or re-Africanizing, we still were socialized first with European views and opinions and values and so forth. But the other aspect I want to have you elaborate on is the notion of European individualism versus African collectivism. You pointed out quite correctly is that our fanatical embrace of individualism. We think we're individuals, and to the extent we are, uh, but we are also members of a collective, a larger body, from whom we get our power. It comes from the group, not necessarily from our individual efforts. Uh, and part of our struggle is understanding that individualism is both good and bad. It has good elements and it has negative elements. If our individualism has us standing in the way of our people's health, safety, growth, development, well, then that individualism is destructive. It's not benefit. It may be benefiting us individually, as like the drug dealer. He's making his money,
Sure.
but what he's selling is destroying our people. Um, so this whole thing about individualism and the rights of an individual and responsibilities of an individual vis-a-vis the group, the African collective, is is a discussion that we really haven't had sufficiently in order to help those folks. The individualism thing operates, I guess, along a continuum. There's some people at the far end of individualism that they say, nobody can tell me what to do. I don't care about the black community. It's all about me. Okay, that's one extreme. Now, that's a negative extreme. If you're going to put yourself and your welfare above the group. But at the other end, the collectivism can also be stifling. It can also hold us back if we're tied into negative elements of the collective, negative belief systems and value systems of the collective. But again, I think it's part of being African centered is doing this kind of analysis taking time to recognize that, hey, look, I got some individual stuff going on in my life that may have me doing things that are contrary, that are not always in the best interest of the collective. So do we help our people, and particularly our youth, who may not, and in far too many cases, don't see any value in things African?
Okay.
It's not Africanness. African culture is not promoted by our celebrities, the people who have the ears of our youth. They may not hear anything at all about their history, traditions, and culture, African and African American, in their school. They may not get any of that in their home, in their extended family. Like you, I have encountered dozens of people who know nothing about Kwanzaa. No idea, never heard of it. I'm talking about young people, and
Wow.
not so young people. You
Right.
know, and I think Kwanzaa is a good way to kind of introduce some African culture. But how do we really promote that? How do we sell this to our young people?
I think we're gonna do that, or we have to put it in the music. We gotta make music for revolutionary change. So it'd be art for revolutionary change. So I think if you put it in the music, it will get their attention. Likewise, if you do music, then subsequent to doing your music, you might do a music video. I'm sure you understand that sound and images are the language of the subconscious mind. And so if you're going to get across to the children and they're paying attention to music, younger people, whether they be teens or early 20 somethings or even younger than that, if they're paying attention to the music, the message has to be in the music. But the problem is we don't control the music industry. It's controlled
Right.
by people that don't look like us.
That's
Uh,
right.
the black music stations are white owned,
That's right.
for the most part. The black music stations are white owned. So we have to take control of the music. And I think in that process, we also have to be mindful of taking control of the media and, the media outlets, whether it be radio or, even the internet. I guess we can throw that in there now because people don't listen to terrestrial radio as much as they used to. Apart from that, I think the educational process has to be very African centered from the beginning, because if you start out teaching a child and you're going from the European frame of reference, you do that for years. At some point, it will be hard to pivot now to an African frame of reference,
That's right.
because it's almost like saying, "Hey, we taught you all of this, but this is not right. So this next thing is actually accurate." So I think the student will lose faith in the instructor if you
Hmm.
pivot in that way. So education has to be a very African centered. And you talk about this idea of sovereignty. I spun into mentioning self-sufficiency. I think if we're going to be sovereign and self-sufficient, we need to own and control our own institutions. And as it stands right now, we do not own enough institutions to be self-sufficient. And so that process, I think, begins with education. Apart from that, and this is a difficult one for people to deal with, but stop paying for cable, stop watching television, stop consuming white-owned media. For a lot of us, that's a foreign concept. So I
Yes.
think that's going to be a hard sell to tell our people to turn off the television. People live by that. Turn off the radio. Turn off these white-owned media outlets, and you have to replace that with something. And so we have to create our own. So I think the media has a lot to do with how we're being socialized. And as it relates to the proper knowledge of ourselves, there's three reasons why we don't have that. Number one is the European-centered religious institutions, because many of us believe what's being taught there, and we're not getting any information about ourselves. And so I think that's where it begins. Number
Hmm.
two is the school and education. So we don't have the proper knowledge of ourselves because we're dealing with European-centered education. And the curriculum in the public school was created many decades ago by white people to educate white children only. And so
Right.
they didn't have us in mind when they created their educational system. So our knowledge, our history, our culture, our traditions are not going to be found in their educational system. So we have to create that for ourselves.
Mhm.
And not only that, the media that we consume, we have to stop consuming European-centered media and begin to create media outlets where we can get our message across ourselves in our own way. And then I said this in the book also because we've seen over the years things like Essence magazine and so forth, which were had a target audience of black people, and then it ended up getting sold to people that were not black. So when we do get our media outlets, we need to make sure that we hold and maintain them and not sell them off. And then over and above that, I think a lot of the educational process should begin at home. But the problem is if the parents don't have it, then they can't teach it. You can't teach knowledge that you don't have, right? And
That's
so
right.
it begins at home. And so I think if we're gonna transform the condition of the group, we have to do all of the things that I mentioned. We have to put the message in the music. We have to control our media. We have to control education in the way we educate our children. We have to turn off white-owned media, and we have to begin to really hone in on beginning that educational process at home. You know, whether you homeschool or you have homeschool collective or cooperative or independent African-centered Black-owned schools. I think those are some of the ways we can begin to change the paradigm.
Mhm. This is fantastic because what you're outlining, brother, for those folk who are wondering, what do we do? Where do we go? Where do we begin? What's the solution? Uh, Part of it, as you mentioned, is cultural. We got to take responsibility for creating art. I guess all of us have to be wise consumers of art and be willing to create art that contains the kinds of messages that we think are wholesome for our people. We can't leave it up to the big record companies or the so-called stars. They, for the most part, all have been bought and sold. They're not going to create art for liberation. They're not going to do it. They're not paid to do that. So if we want to be free, those of us who have this desire, this historical impulse, are going to have to become very multidimensional.
Mm,
We're going to have to create music. We're going to have to homeschool. We're going to have to work within our own families. And I believe strongly that this is really the only arena where we have legitimacy and credibility. Limited is with our family,
mm,
our nuclear family, as well as our extended family, on mother's side and family side. And those family reunions could be used as educational vehicles for the family to instill the kinds of concepts like the Ninguzu Saba, for example, like the notion of Sankofa, like the notion of Ma'at, from ideas, concepts, practices from our culture, and introduce those to our families first and foremost, and then build from there. We don't have the money to compete with the mainstream media in terms of the struggle for the hearts and minds of our people, but what we do have is that family connection, that family love and trust, which is greater than the man's technology, I think. Love. And I also believe you're on target with the rejecting the European owned media as the ultimate arbitrators of what's beautiful, what's acceptable, what's truth. One of Donald Trump's brilliant contributions is to our understanding of media and knowledge is fake news.
mm,
You know, everything that comes from the mainstream, well, I wouldn't go so far as to say everything, but at least 90% of what you hear in the mainstream media is fake news. It's been doctored. It's been slanted. It's not the real truth. It's their version that they want the masses to have of what's taking place in the world. And we got to develop that kind of maturity to understand that the mainstream media, even the alternative media, is not giving us 100% of the truth. No media can do that. We have to read and study and look at several different sources print as well as electronic, as well as personal contact, in order to get a handle on what's really taking place in this society. And I think your book is a tool for those who read, right? And that's not, unfortunately, the majority of our young people or the majority of our people. I've had the experience, as you have, going into plenty of black people's homes and seeing no books, no library, not even for their children.
That's right.
So we know they ain't reading. They're not getting the message through books. But as you suggest, a viable alternative in our culture is through art, is through music, is through spoken word, etc. That vehicle. One of your chapters I want you to expand on is chapter 6, fact lesson number 6, principles of critical thinking.
Okay.
And that's what we're doing here. We're looking at these situations critically. Expand upon how critical thinking fits into African-centered thought, if you'd be so kind, brother.
Yeah, I think if we're going to transform the condition of the group, critical thinking is an absolute must because you have to arrive critically and be pragmatic. You have to think critically and be pragmatic if you're going to arrive at an African-centered analysis. And so I think critical thinking is of vital importance. In fact, I'm trying to forgive me for turning pages on the mic here, but I'm trying to get to that page now because I'm glad you raised that question because this is something that I want to touch on. Principles of critical thinking. It says 1, knowledge is acquired only through thinking, reasoning, and questioning. Knowledge is based on facts. So if we're going to have some amount of knowledge, we have to think, right? We talked about this idea of individualism. That's being promoted in, an institution like the church. And I'm not trying to, kick dirt on the church. I'm not a Christian, but you hear a lot of people saying, I am blessed. I am blessed forsakes the African communal concept of the village, because now it's about your individual being blessed and your individual salvation. This is what most religions promote. And it's not just Christianity. I'm not just attacking that, but I'm just saying the monotheistic religions, period, is about personal and individual salvation. So moving on, it says belief is not knowledge. Beliefs are opinions acted upon as if they are facts. Again, we go into the religious institutions that are based on belief. Belief is a personal choice, right? And so whatever you choose to believe is your personal choice. I think the mistake a lot of people make is to try to promote their belief as fact when it's something that the individual has chosen to believe. And it's almost like they're trying to convince the rest of us that what they've chosen to accept is actual fact. And so, that's the problem that I have. I think you could be in the church and be revolutionary. But if you're in the church and your mentality is, well, hey, I am down with this thing and you're not, therefore there's something wrong with you. Or maybe may not be moral or ethically sound because you're not involved in this particular religious, operation. I think that's a mistake. And there's a chapter, fact lesson number 8, where I talk about religion and how people that are not religious may sometimes antagonize the religious and vice versa. Sometimes people that are religious may antagonize those that are not religious. I think that causes division and separation among us, and that does not facilitate the kind of unity that we would need to bring about the independent reality that we're talking about. It says opinions are not based on facts, knowledge, or reasoning. That's what I just expounded on. Opinions are your personal belief, which you've chosen to accept. Critical thinking is an active process based on applying analysis, the synthesis of data, and your ability to assess the information being received. So you have to have the ability to be able to process information, to determine fact from fiction, fact from opinion. Someone trying to give an intellectual analysis as opposed to someone conveying an emotional opinion, subjective opinion about something. Number 2 said it is only from learning how to think that we learn what to think. Now, you've been in education for a lot of years. I'm sure that resonates with you, the idea of learning how to think. I feel a lot of us don't know how to assess information to determine whether it's true or false. You have a lot of internet-based movements that spew a lot of disinformation. and that a lot of people accept. So you have a lot of fake experts that are promoting pseudo intellectualism
Mm-hmm.
on YouTube. They have no credentials. They're not educators. Excuse me. They're not anthropologists. Let me get a little bit of water. They're not archaeologists. They're not educators or historians on any level. Yet people still listen to and follow
Mm-hmm.
these people. So they have yet to learn how to think. Um, if I could add you to chime in, how would you respond to this idea that people have yet to learn how to think?
Oh, I agree. Uh, Rational thinking, logical thinking has to be taught. I don't think we human beings think logically uh, innately. We have to be taught to be logical thinkers. And in Western culture, the first people who attempted to do this were the Greeks. There's a place for emotion in our lives. And also, there's a place for being irrational and logical and uh, thinking sequentially and quantifiably. Uh, and when we bring the two together, the emotional component of our thinking, that's the feeling, the passion, the intuition. Uh, Once we bring that and put it in harmony with our learned, rational, logical, critical thinking, well, then we're operating out of both hemispheres of the brain. That the emotion, the music, the spontaneity, the color, uh, those are thought to be right brain attributes. Being able to think mathematically, which is logically, where we can add up and come to a conclusion, come to a sum, um, being able to weigh the evidence, seeing the strengths and the weaknesses of individuals, of systems, uh, is that's learned behavior. Most of us have not been taught to deeply probe and critique our deepest feelings, our deepest beliefs. It's like a Christian have to be a good Christian. I think you got to be able to look at the pros and the cons of history of Christianity. You got to understand the history of how your belief system evolved into what it is now. Uh, and you've got to do that, be willing to do that independent research and not depend upon some preacher, some reverend, some TV personality, TV preacher to do your thinking for you about what's in your book, the Bible or the Quran or whatever holy book you think you have. You've got to study that. But we But most Christians, most Muslims, etc., they don't think that way. That's where their critical thinking breaks down. And this is not just in the realm of religion, it's also in the realm of politics and in law and economics. You name the discipline, we're not taught to think critically about that particular discipline or belief system. Because once our emotions get wrapped up in it, uh, our feelings get wrapped up in it, well, then we are inclined to put the critical part of our thinking aside and operate out of the emotional. Now, I usually get in trouble when we point out that there's some gender differences in thinking and feeling. Women kind of think and feel differently than men do about a whole lot of matters, and men vice versa, which keeps us at loggerheads, men and women, not really understanding each other because we think differently. And that operates to the detriment of our community because the men are trying to convince the women to think like them,
Mm.
and the women are trying to convince the men to think like women. And we're not appreciating the fact that there's strength in our differences and how we capitalize on that. Women are not going to think like men, and men are not going to think like women. It just ain't going to happen. We just have to learn how to accept the strengths of each what each gender brings to the table when it comes to our logic, our critical thinking, as well as our emotional components of our thought and behavior. And it's difficult because, again, this stuff is not being taught. In college, we have classes in critical thinking where we help students kind of realize, based on logic, that you have to be careful with your language. Whenever you say that all A's are B, that means just that. There are no exceptions, right? You can't say all black people are lazy or all white people are racist. No. Some white people are racist, but not all. All means 100%, no exceptions. And if you're going to use that language, you've got to be certain that you are really dealing with something which is, in fact, 100%. Very little is in life. So helping our people to understand that we got to look at each other and our interactions with each other in our community with a mixture of compassion and love and feeling, but at the same time, we have to be rational and critical. And then I think there's a greater likelihood that we can incorporate the best of our African history, culture, and tradition.
Now, apart from some of the ideas that I touched on, are there any other ways to get that message across so that our people can, get it in a way where they can understand it so that they can act on it?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we have to practice it. Those of us who understand that, we have to, when people's emotions run strong and they're thinking more out of their emotional body, their emotional mind than their rational mind, their critical mind, we got to help people bring it back. You're getting too emotional about this. You got all this passion invested in this. That's cool, but let's kind of swing the pendulum back out of the way and look at another dimension of this. So we can have something more akin to 360 degrees of knowledge about a given phenomenon or a given event or a person or whatever the case may be. And the notions of homeschooling. This is something really, you're not going to get it in school because the system does not want you to think critically. They want us to think emotionally and not question at all, have very little skepticism, believe what we're told. But we know that the earmark of a critical thinker is they're skeptical. They're not going to believe something just because everybody else believes it or the president believes it. They're going to do their own investigation and look at that phenomenon and come to their own conclusions about that phenomenon.
Okay, now let me ask you this. It also goes on to say, and we reading from fact lesson number 6, the unquestioning acceptance of what another says as fact is not learning, nor is it part of the skill of thinking critically. It, in fact, inhibits any learning from taking place. And so in that context, there seem to be some internet-based Black separatist movements that have popped up that are doing their best to try to divide the group. Mm-hmm. What is your opinion on some of those fake experts online that are trying to divide the group?
Well, I always appreciate the fact that those who rule from generation to generation are masters of deception. They're masters of creating institutions, programs, funding personalities, etc., who will advance their particular orientation, their particular goals and objectives. So I would imagine that some of these brothers and sisters are being paid. They're government agents, government disinformation agents, and they're plentiful in our society. The one thing about Absolutely. The rulers, they control they control the opposition. There's a concept called controlled opposition. What they will do is that in order to flush out of the community all folk who are thinking along certain lines, they'll create an organization and fund an organization like the Black Panther Party to draw out all the revolutionary-oriented youth who are kind of thinking about trying to change the system. We'll create an organization for them, fund it, hire them to do it so we can keep track of them, so we can monitor what they're doing. so we can control what they're doing. And that's how they roll. They create an opposition just to flush out people, members of our community that think like you and I, so they can keep tabs on us, and so that they can direct us to where they want us to go.
Now
And I think,
I'm glad you said that. Go ahead. Go ahead.
and I think we totally misjudge our enemies if we think that they don't think this way. Totally misjudge them. Any black man or woman that pops up on the scene, and the media is a darling of the media, is probably a paid agent.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure,
They're not
absolutely. Now
spontaneous.
we
They're
are.
not indigenous or spontaneous to the community. They are being created and funded. What the term industry? Cat Williams was the first one to use the term, to my knowledge. Call them an industry plant. Have you heard that term? An industry plant?
I have, yes.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of industry
Yeah.
plants in education, not just in the entertainment field, but in education and politics and law, and you name the human activity, there's industry plants, people who they have put out there in our community and the larger American community in order to guide our thoughts and our behaviors along lines that they want to go.
Now,
But your book, this African-centered thinking, is an antidote to that mind control that the Europeans are so adept at. They're masters of mind control. Their mind control is so slick that you don't even know you're being controlled.
that's right.
They
That's
know
right.
they won when you can
Now
convince
you talk.
your victim to be a part of their victimization, where they sign up to be victims. Well, then you know you got their minds,
Yeah.
and that's where we
Yeah,
are.
we all went over.
Yeah.
You talked about paid people that are being paid to misguide us. We went over
Yes, sir.
recently, you and I, this idea of proxy racism. Did you get a chance to spend some time on that?
A little bit. A little bit.
Okay.
I think
And
it's a
what are your
concept
thoughts
that
based on what you
um, I see it as another manifestation of mind control where you can convict, where you can convince folk who should not be supportive of your ideas to support them.
saw? Right.
Yeah. Uh,
Right.
and part of it may be, a hope for material gain on the part of those individuals who join your team. It's like so with this black folk who are supporting Trump because they figure that they're going to get something out of it materially, financially,
Individual. Right.
or
Individualistic in
career-wise,
thinking. Right.
from Donald Trump and the Republicans. They're opportunists, and that's to be
Sure.
expected. There always will be people who are going to cozy up to the powers that be and hope to win reward from the powers that be. That's the oldest game on the planet, in human community, between masters and slaves, between people in power and those who cater to people in power. And our community is full of them. And I don't
You know
fault
everything.
them, for that. That's natural. It's natural to try to cozy up with your oppressor and hope you can win some concessions from him or her. Natural. What's unnatural is to turn your back on that. Say, no, I'm not going to be. I'm not for sale. I see the game. I don't want to play the game. I don't want to be used. I want to be a sovereign human being, a God-loving, freedom-loving, human being-loving human being, not anyone's tool. I'm not for sale. And you don't need to announce that, you just don't do it.
Yeah,
You just
everything
don't
we're
sell
saying
out.
is basically the product and the symptom of the system of structural racism, which is based on the myth of white supremacy. The system of white supremacy and the behavior that surrounds it is not normal. It's not natural. The great Mumia Abu Jamal said, "It's right to fight oppression."
Yes.
I think we need to spend some time on this idea of eliminating the system and fighting oppression. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's a tall order. I think that's an intergenerational enterprise. American capitalism is not going to disappear. It may slowly wither away and be transformed into something else, a different label, but what's going to continue is that wealth and power is going to reside in the hands of certain American families, certain global families, like the Rothschilds, for example, who have been world financiers, European financiers, for more than 150 years. We got great wealth, great power. That's not going to change. Um, the, I think what we got to do is understand these processes and these powers and decide how do we manipulate ourselves in ways that allow us to become independent from, to the extent that we can, from external control. Nothing should be controlling the black community but black people, and not all black people. Okay, not every black person is qualified. I think our challenge is to have a leadership test that helps us determine who is legitimate in our community, and criteria which I use if the brother and sister isn't promoting the acquisition of the control of our food, our clothing, our shelter, our education, our medical service, and above all, self-defense, well, that person is not legitimate. They don't have the best interests at heart. They don't understand our history. They don't understand that what makes us human is being free. And you ain't free if you don't control no land, if you don't control the food, the production of the food that you eat. If you have to go to the white man's supermarket to buy your food, you can't feed your family unless you go to that white man's store. Well, then you're his slave. Whoever provides you your food, your clothing, your shelter, your education, your medication, and your self-defense is your master. That's your master. And if you ain't doing it, you're a slave. Someone else is doing it for you, and they're controlling you. Just that simple. And if we want to be free and out of the control of Europeans, Asians, and others, we got to stand up and take control of our basic survival needs. And voting ain't one of them. Okay? Voting is not a survival need. Food is, right? Shelter, being able to build houses, maintain houses, own houses, and other buildings. Clothing. All our food now, clothing is produced in Asia or Bangladesh, some in Haiti. I've seen clothing coming out of Tanzania. Other folks around the world, but China's the big one, produces clothing for us. We don't produce that for ourselves. We don't know. We don't even know that we should be producing our own clothing in mass. There should be no black person in this country buying non-African produced clothes. We should take that completely over. And on it goes. The education, we know how critical education is. Our 100 and some HBCUs is a good start in terms of us trying to educate us. But even there, and I'm a product of these HBCUs, the orientation, the philosophy, the curriculum, all that's European. The whole pedagogy, the whole thrust and goal of giving a degree, a bachelor's and a master's and all that crap, that's all European stuff. Ain't got nothing to do with African people. We're simply imitating white educators. And that's the problem with black controlled education. If you got black people who are just simply have the same degrees and imitating what their white professors taught them, that's not progress. That's not real education. That's not education for sovereignty. And what I like about your book is you make it very clear to the reader that that these kinds of shifts in thinking are necessary, are critical, if we're going to be a free and independent people, and really
Okay,
have
now we
some
got
degree of wealth and security, some intergenerational wealth that we can actually pass down some wealth, some power, some authority to our children. And I think that's really where all of this work has to be practiced and implemented. Strong family. We need strong, autonomous, intelligently guided families. The community is only as strong as its families. If the family is weak, the community is weak. And if the community is weak, your nation is weak. We have a weak, we got to, so, and what makes this so easy is that we all are connected to some degree to some families, blood. So that's where you do your work. I try and work with the children in my family extensively, continually, in terms of our African-centered knowledge, how they should think, how they should move. Oftentimes, it's not always in concert with what the parents want. But I'm 78 years old. I'm an elder in my family, so I can pull some rank, and I ain't got no problem with doing that.
Okay, Dr. Hotep, you talked years ago about integrationists, assimilationists versus Pan-African Black nationalists. You said if you're Black in America, you're either one of those two. Can you explain that?
Yes, it's easy to assimilate, to be assimilationist, because that's the major thrust, social, political, economic, cultural thrust for our people in this nation, is to assimilate. And this is how we in the Black community determine who's successful, who's influential, who's worthy of listening to, is to the extent that you have been able to assimilate. The ultimate assimilationist was Barack Obama as president. I mean, he was at the top of the tree. He was the top of the ladder for a black man, a black person in this country. You can't get any more assimilated than to have the white folks elect you as their president. And it's and descending ladder from there. At the top of the pyramid would be the top flight, nationally recognized, white approved, and appointed political figures, economic figures, cultural figures, so-called celebrities, and this is who we look up to: people who got the money and who have the clout. But what we don't
That's
factor
correct.
in is that this is all borrowed clout. Any one of our prominent black people, no matter what industry or occupation they're in, they all can be taken down by white people. And Kanye was the example of that.
Yeah.
He was at the top of the pinnacle, a billionaire, but you see, within 24 hours, those white folks took him down. He lost
Right.
$1 billion in a matter of a day or two, messing with them white
That's
folk.
right.
Saying the
That's
message
right.
that no matter how rich and how similar you think you are, they can bring you down. And you better stay in
Sure.
place or they will take you down. Have no doubt about it. They do
That's
not
right.
like black people who want to be independent
Mm.
and have independent thoughts and serve our people. Because they figured we let you into the party and you're going to defy us. P. Diddy would be another. He thought he got too big for his britches. Because he was messing
Yeah.
with that Diageo global liquor distributor
Yes.
who was handling his Ciroc, and he got
Yes.
into a beef with them and called them racist. They said, "Look,
Mm.
Negro, we made you. We can take you down."
That's
And
right.
that's what they did.
That's right. And that's exactly right. That's right. Now, Baba Hotep, we're at the end of our hour. It always seems to go so fast.
Yes,
I
it
would like
does.
to direct people. I would like to direct people to something you wrote, still available online. It's called Intellectual Maroons: Architects of African Sovereignty. What can you tell us about that quickly?
Well, the notion of an intellectual maroon, we contribute to a brother named Jacob Carruthers, who was an Egyptologist, an Africanologist, a professor at, I think, Northeast University, I think in Chicago for many years. So he comes out of the academic community. He's an ancestor now. But he coined the term intellectual maroon. And intellectual maroons are those black men and women who have run away intellectually from the plantation. from the intellectual plantation, from the ivory tower plantation. Just as during times of slavery from 1619 up to January 1st, 1863, there were Maroons, physical Maroons, black men and women who actually successfully ran away from slavery. And the Europeans called them Maroons. And these folks who self-emancipated created their own independent, sovereign communities, little mini nations within the rural South. The Everglades, for example, there in Florida, was a Maroon settlement area. The Great Dismal Swamp, the Europeans called it, there on the border of North Carolina and Virginia, another great massive swamp, was another place where black folk ran away from plantations to be free. Those people, again, were called Maroons. Just as we have people who ran away physically from slavery, now we need to run away intellectually from slavery, which means we're doing what we're doing right now, have been doing for the past hour. We're analyzing and critiquing and attempting to free ourselves from European ideas, being intellectually free from European belief system, European values, European lifestyles, European worldviews. That's the intellectual freedom that we need in order to do the work that we're doing, to hold the discussion that we're holding. Is if only intellectually free black people can talk the way we've been talking for this past hour. So we are intellectual Maroons. And there's a whole community of us, of course, particularly in the black psychology community, black psychology, African psychology movement, who are attempting to free their minds. And it's intergenerational work. And it's lifetime work. As we started this discussion by pointing out how deeply we've been socialized, educated, miseducated into European values, European beliefs, European holidays, European religions, European standards of beauty, you name it. All of that's been shaped by the European slave experience. So to be free, we got to leave all that behind. And embrace being an intellectual Maroon is one who has no problems accepting those concepts and principles and practices that come out of our African culture that are beneficial to us here and now. That's the short answer, my brother.
Yeah,
Brother,
no,
I appreciate your book.
I got you. We're gonna.
I want to encourage our listeners to get this book. Everything that we've been discussing, we find ramifications of it within this book. Brother Ramasu has done a excellent job in taking some concept principles, some difficult concepts and principles and ideas, and making them very readable and very understandable. This book can change your life. It can change how you, or better put, give you another set of lenses through which you can see and interpret the world. And there's nothing wrong with having 3 or 4 pairs of glasses. And we are building an African-centered lens. White boys already given us one. Here's a European set of lenses. We all got that. And most of us can't even take that lens off. Dust the lenses off and put on another. But those of us who are trying to be African-centered, we have another set of lenses through which we can look at the world. We don't need to have just one.
Sure. Now, Baba Hotep, I got to bring you back on and talk about 72 concepts to liberate the African mind. We have yet to even touch on that. So perhaps maybe next month I could bring you back if you can avail us of your time, and we can get into a discussion about that as well.
I would be delighted, brother. I would be honored.
Okay.
I'm a deep respecter of the work that you're doing with your contribution to our people, to our struggle, and your ongoing quest for clarity. I respect that. I respect you immensely. You're one of our young lions.
Likewise.
You're one of our young lions.
Likewise.
Yes. No, I'm 80. Now I'm damn near 80. I'm an elder. I'm passing the torch.
Got it.
I have more time behind me than what I have ahead of me. Okay, so it's time for me to pass the torch, to share with the younger brothers who are on this path what little I've learned along this path of trying to be a sovereign, independent, free-thinking African man. Okay, who loves his people and who wants to see our people free.
Yeah. So
Yes, brother.
on
Just
that
let me
note,
know.
I
Just let me
will.
know when you want me. I'm here for you.
Got it. Got it. And in the meantime, I'm going to send people to that article, Intellectual Maroons, Architects of African Sovereignty. I put that in the chat so people can maybe copy paste that and put that in the Google search. You can read that one for free
Yes,
if
sir.
you want to see. If you want to see and hear more or read more from the great Dr. Uhuru Hotep. Baba Hotep, I'm out of here, brother. I want to thank you again, and we'll be in touch, all right?
No doubt. No doubt. Peace and love to you and your family. God bless.
Definitely. All right, peace.